Good evening and welcome back. Tonight we arrive at a quiet doorway into ancient Egypt and step softly into one of the oldest ways people ever tried to explain the world. In these old creation myths, the beginning is not a loud beginning. It is water, darkness, first light, and the patient shaping of everything that follows. If you enjoy these slow, restful journeys through old worlds and thoughtful stories, you can subscribe and return whenever you'd like something calm to listen to. And if you feel like it, you might leave a comment with where you're listening from tonight, or what quiet subject you'd like to explore next. For now, let the room grow a little softer around you. Let the day loosen its grip. We'll move gently through the first dawn of Egyptian thought, through gods who rose from the waters, through sacred hills, hidden names, and the feeling that the world once had to begin somewhere very small and very still. And so, with the light low and the pace unhurried, we begin where the Egyptians often began, with the vast dark water before the world was shaped. Before temples had shadows, before statues had faces, before fields and cities and riverbanks could be named, there was none. None was the endless ancient water. Not a river, not a lake, not a sea in the ordinary sense, but something larger and older in the imagination. It was the formless deep, the silent fullness from which all things could come. In Egyptian thought, this was not emptiness, it was possibility. That idea appears again and again in many places, but in Egypt it has a particular calmness to it. The world does not appear all at once with thunder, it rises, it surfaces. It becomes visible slowly from what was already there, and perhaps that is one reason these myths feel so suited to the night. They do not rush, they drift. Different cities in Egypt told the story in different ways. This is one of the quiet pleasures of ancient mythology. There is rarely only one version. There are versions linked to temples, to priestly traditions, to local gods, to old rituals repeated in sacred places where memory mattered almost as much as belief. In Heliopolis, the city of the sun, the story often begins with Atum. Atum is a great creator figure, self-generated, complete in himself, existing before the familiar world had taken shape. In some versions, Atum emerges from the waters on the first mound, the first patch of dry ground, a small rise in the infinite flood. That mound is called the Benben, and it is one of those beautifully simple images that can hold a whole cosmos inside it. A single hill lifting out of the water, a first place to stand, a first place where creation can happen. Egypt, after all, was a land deeply shaped by the Nile. The river arrived, withdrew, and returned. It left fertile silt. It made the black land distinct from the red desert. It taught people, perhaps more than once, that order could emerge from motion and life from something that looked at first like change and uncertainty. So when Egyptian myth imagines the beginning as water, it is not choosing a strange or distant image. It is choosing a familiar one, lifted into sacred time. There is something almost restful in that. The beginning is not an argument. It is a scene, a stillness, a surface, a rising point of land, a first sky above it, and in that first scene the world begins to gather itself. Atum is one of the great names of Egyptian creation, and yet the figure is quiet in a way that feels almost inward. Atum is not a distant engineer standing apart from the world. Atum is the world beginning to think of itself. In the Heliopolitan account, Atum brings forth Shu and Tefnut, the first divine pair associated with air and moisture, breath and dampness, separation and presence. These are not dramatic shapes in the way later stories might imagine divine birth. They are elemental, they are conditions, they are the first arrangements that allow a world to be a world. Shu and Tefnut in turn become the parents of Jeb and Nut, the earth and the sky. Again, the image is beautifully plain. Earth beneath, sky above. Between them space. The Egyptians often return to this pattern of thinking. The world is not only a collection of objects, it is relationships above and below, visible and hidden, dry and wet, ordered and wild. Life in this way of seeing is made of balance, and balance matters deeply in Egyptian culture. The concept of Ma'at, often translated as truth, order, harmony, or rightness, is woven through the whole civilizational imagination. Creation myths are not only stories about beginnings, they are stories about why order is precious, why it must be maintained, and why the world remains fragile enough to need tending. This is one reason the myths feel so human, even when they are grand. They are not merely about the gods, they are about the conditions under which a stable life can exist. One can imagine an Egyptian listener, many centuries ago, hearing these stories in a temple or in a recitation by an educated priest, and feeling not just wonder but reassurance. The world has a pattern. The gods know the pattern. The sun rises because the pattern holds. Of course, the myths do not always say this in the same way. Egyptian religion was not a single smooth river of ideas. It was a landscape of local traditions, some of them very old, each with its own habits and sacred language. In Memphis, the creator god is often Ptah, who shapes the world through mind and speech. That is another lovely beginning. Not water this time, but thought. The heart conceives, the tongue gives form. What is spoken becomes real. It is hard not to pause on that for a moment. A god who creates by speaking, a world brought into being by naming. In the Egyptian imagination, words were not cheap things. They carried force, names mattered. To know a name was to know something real about the thing named. Power could live in a name and identity could be anchored by it. This is why Egyptian myths often pay close attention to names, titles, and hidden aspects of divine beings. The old stories do not hurry past this. They linger. They seem to know that when a thing is named, it becomes easier to hold in the mind, and perhaps easier to keep from drifting back into none, back into the great water where nothing yet had shape. Among all the Egyptian gods associated with creation, the sun god Ra stands especially close to the feeling of daily beginning. Each morning the sun appears as if the world is being renewed. Each evening it disappears as if the world must trust that it will return. This repeated cycle was never merely ordinary, it was cosmic. It was a drama enacted without actors visible to the eye. In many Egyptian myths, Ra travels across the sky in a solar bark, a sacred boat that carries him through the day. At night, his journey continues through the underworld, where he must pass by dangers, gates, and strange beings before returning at dawn. This is a story not just about the sun, but about endurance. The world does not simply keep itself, it moves through darkness and emerges again. That thought must have mattered deeply in a place where the night could feel immense, and where the desert beyond the cultivated land could seem to hold both danger and silence. The sun was not taken for granted, it was a blessing in motion. In some traditions, Ra emerges from the first mound or from a lotus flower. The lotus, opening with the day, becomes another gentle image of creation. Something closed becomes open, something hidden becomes visible. The first light rises and the world remembers itself. Egyptian artists often showed the sun as a disk, sometimes with a scarab beetle pushing it, or with a falcon carrying it, or simply as the bright center around which gods and kings organized their lives. The scarab is especially interesting because it reflects a quiet observation of nature. The beetle rolls its ball across the ground, and in myth this becomes a symbol of the sun's movement across the sky. These connections are small and attentive. A beetle on the sand, the daily journey of light. The human wish to see the heavens in familiar things. The Egyptians were not alone in making meaning this way, of course, but they were remarkably consistent in letting natural cycles become sacred language. The flood of the Nile, the rising of stars, the daily arc of the sun, the hidden passage of the moon, the growth of crops, the rhythms of life and death, all of these belong to a larger pattern that myth could help explain. And perhaps that is what makes the stories feel so steady. They are not only about cosmic power, they are about repetition, morning after morning, season after season, river flood after river flood, the old world continuing and being renewed just enough to remain itself. When Ra is imagined as traveling through the night, the story becomes especially comforting in its own way. The dark is not denied. It is entered. The underworld is not a place the myth ignores, but a place the god must cross. That makes the return of dawn feel earned, almost tender. And if you listen to the story slowly, the whole universe begins to resemble a long voyage, moving from stillness into shape, from shape into light, and from light into the familiar world where people can plant, gather, pray, and sleep. Egyptian creation stories are not only about beginnings in the simple sense, they are also about lineage, division, inheritance, and the unfolding of divine families. From Atum come generations of gods. From these generations emerge the great Ennead, the 9 deities especially associated with Heliopolis. This grouping can feel a little like looking at a family tree drawn in sacred language. The gods are not all interchangeable. They have roles, relationships, and sometimes tensions. There is a certain quiet dignity in that. The cosmos is organized not just by force but by kinship. And yet Egyptian theology is never entirely neat. Different centers of worship gave prominence to different gods. Over time, divine identities could blend, absorb, or overlap. A god could be local and universal at once. A creator could also be a son, a father, a king, a hidden power, or a solar force. One of the most interesting examples is Ammon, whose name means something like the hidden one. In Theban religion, Ammon rises to extraordinary importance, eventually becoming associated with Ammon-Ra. Here again, the Egyptian imagination leans into a paradox that feels strangely modern in its subtlety. The creator is both visible and hidden, present and concealed, known and beyond complete knowing. That idea gives the myths a depth that rewards slow attention. Not everything must be exposed at once. Some things are strongest when partly veiled. In many temple traditions, the gods were understood through ritual as much as narrative. The myth was not only a story told about the past. It was a pattern enacted in the present. Offerings, festival processions, sacred recitations, and image-making all helped maintain the bond between the human and divine worlds. Egyptian temples were not merely architectural spaces. They were active landscapes of order. Their inner sanctuaries were often hidden from ordinary view. This secrecy was not a trick. It was part of the sacred atmosphere. The divine did not need to be everywhere in plain sight to be real. There is something very restful in that kind of sacredness. It does not demand constant astonishment. It asks for attention, repetition, and care. And when we return to the creation myths themselves, we notice how often they move between concealment and emergence. Water becomes land, land becomes place, place becomes temple, temple becomes a point where humans can meet the divine. In later periods, Egyptian religion absorbed new influences, new political realities, and new expressions of devotion, but the old creation images stayed alive. The first mound remained. The sun still rose. The hidden and the visible continued their quiet arrangement. It is easy to imagine these myths being spoken in a low voice, not because they are fragile, but because they do not need to be loud. They belong to the deep part of time, and the deep part of time does not hurry. In the Memphite version of creation, the god Ptah becomes central, and the emphasis shifts in a very interesting way. Ptah is a craftsman god, linked with making, skill, and ordered work. In this tradition, the world is created through the heart and the tongue. Ptah conceives in the heart, speaks with the tongue, and what is spoken comes into being. This is one of the most elegant ideas in Egyptian theology. Thought, speech, reality. There is something deeply calming about a world that begins in this way. It suggests that creation is not random noise. It is intention made audible. The Memphite theology, preserved in a later inscription, presents Ptah as the power behind many forms of existence. Even other gods in this account are understood through his creative capacity. The details can feel dense if one reads them quickly, but at a slow pace they reveal a lovely confidence in language. Words do not merely describe the world, they help make it. This reverence for speech also appears in Egyptian funerary practices and magical texts. Spells, names, titles, and sacred formulas were all treated with seriousness. The written word was more than a record. It was presence fixed in sign. Papyrus rolls, tomb inscriptions, coffin texts, the words on temple walls, all of these created a world in which language had continuity. The living could speak to the dead, the gods could be addressed, protection could be invoked, memory could be preserved, and so it becomes clearer why creation myths mattered beyond pure curiosity. They explained not only where the gods came from, but why words, rituals, and names were effective. If Ptah creates by speech, then the world itself is responsive to order. If names matter, then identity matters. If language can shape reality, then the old scribes and priests are doing something serious each time they trace a sign with ink or chisel a line into stone. The Egyptian writing system itself, with its mix of symbolic and phonetic signs, seems almost perfectly suited to this worldview. It is visual and linguistic at once. A bird can be a bird and a sound. A reed can be a reed and a clue. Meaning layers itself gently. And perhaps that is part of the pleasure of Egyptian creation myths. They are not only stories, they are also a kind of intellectual landscape where thought, speech, image, and ritual all touch one another. In such a world, the first act of creation is not necessarily a hand reaching out. It may be a mind becoming aware, a tongue giving shape, a name settling into silence, and from that silence the visible world begins to gather again. One of the most memorable features of Egyptian religious thought is the way it refuses to make the sun simple. We know the sun as a daily fact. It rises, it arcs, it sets. But in myth, that fact becomes a journey. The sunboat carries Ra through the sky by day and then through the underworld by night. This nightly passage is full of gates, guardians, and dark stretches of water or cavernous space. The sun must be protected. It must be renewed. It must continue. In some versions, the god faces the serpent Apophis, a chaotic force that threatens the order of the cosmos. Apophis is not usually a rival in a balanced, equal sense. It is more like the pressure of disorder, the possibility that night might not end cleanly, that form might fail to return. And yet the myth does not linger in fear. It lingers in process. Every night is a passage. Every dawn is a return. This gives Egyptian creation thought a cyclical quality that feels almost musical. The same themes appear again and again, but never quite in the same way. Creation is not a single event sealed in the past. It is continuous maintenance. That idea may have been especially meaningful in a civilization so closely connected to agricultural timing, royal legitimacy, and temple ritual. The king, in some traditions, helped maintain cosmic order. Temples enacted the daily care of divine images. Festivals renewed memory. All of it belonged to a world where repetition was not dull. It was sacred responsibility. The sun's journey also places the underworld in an interesting role. The Egyptian underworld is not simply a place of punishment. It is a complex realm of passage, judgment, and transformation. It contains danger, yes, but also the possibility of continuity beyond death. For the living, this could be a source of comfort. Death was not a blank disappearance. It was a transition into a structured other world. That is part of why funerary art and texts matter so much in Egypt. The tomb was not only a resting place, it was a carefully prepared environment for afterlife. The Book of the Dead, for instance, is not really a single book in the modern sense, but a collection of spells and instructions meant to help the dead navigate the next world. Its presence reminds us that Egyptian cosmology did not end at creation. It extended outward into the afterlife, into memory, into the ongoing relationship between the seen and unseen. When one listens to these myths slowly, one can almost feel the smooth turning of sacred time. Night into day, day into night, life into death, death into continued life. Not a straight line, but a circle, or perhaps a boat crossing an endless dark water, always moving, always watched, always returning. And because the return is built into the story, the whole cosmos feels less lonely. Among the most beautiful images in Egyptian myth is the pairing of Nut and Geb, sky and earth. Nut is often shown arched over the world, her body forming the heavens. Geb lies below, the earth beneath human feet. Between them is space, and that space is what allows life as we know it. Sometimes the myth says they were once close together, embraced until Shu separated them. This separation may sound harsh in summary, but in the symbolic language of creation it is necessary. Without distance there is no room for breath. Without sky and earth apart there is no world in which beings can move. The image is simple and powerful. Sky above, earth below, the living in between. Nut also becomes associated with the daily swallowing and rebirth of the sun. The sun enters her body at evening and is born again at dawn. In this way, the sky is not merely a ceiling. It is alive, maternal, and cyclical. Egyptian art often renders these cosmic relationships in graceful form. A goddess stretched across a sarcophagus, stars on a dark body, a sun beneath her feet or between her limbs. These images do not merely illustrate myth, they embody it. There is a tactile quality to them, as though the sky itself were close enough to touch, if only through symbolic imagination. Geb, too, is more than ground. He is the living earth, sometimes depicted with vegetation, sometimes with an animal or with the green life of the Nile Valley. The earth in Egyptian thought is not dead matter. It is fertile, occupied, and speaking in the language of harvest and burial alike. This double aspect, life and death, runs quietly through many Egyptian ideas. The ground receives the seed, and later the dead. The tomb is placed in the earth, yet within that same earth crops grow when the river waters the land. The earth is not simply an end, it is part of a cycle. If one follows the myth carefully, it becomes clear that the world is made of visible arrangements that also carry invisible meaning. The sky is a goddess, the earth is a god, the air between them is a divine act of separation. The stars are not random lights but markers in sacred order. Such a world can feel very spacious, even in its stillness, and because it is spacious, it can hold both awe and rest. One may imagine lying beneath a real night sky, looking upward the way an ancient Egyptian might have looked, and feeling that the heavens were not empty at all, but full of presence, ordered and patient. The old myths teach that the world above is not far away. It is simply arranged differently, and the arrangement, once understood, can be trusted enough for sleep. It is worth pausing here gently on the fact that Egypt never had only one creation story. That is one of the most interesting things about it. Heliopolis speaks of Atum and the sun. Memphis speaks of Ptah and the power of thought and speech. Hermopolis, in another tradition, gives us the Ogdoad, 8 primordial deities associated with watery chaos and hidden conditions before the world takes form. Each of these traditions reflects a city, a temple culture, a theological emphasis, a way of seeing the divine world that grew from particular human communities. Hermopolis is especially fascinating because it imagines the pre-creation condition as pairs of cosmic qualities, often interpreted as water, darkness, infinity, and hiddenness. These are not dramatic characters in the usual sense. They are primordial states, almost like the texture of the universe before it settles into recognizable shape. This is a very Egyptian kind of abstraction. It is not abstraction detached from the world. It is abstraction rooted in natural and sacred experience. The idea that creation emerged from watery darkness appears again and again and again, yet each tradition gives that emergence its own shape. That flexibility may have been one reason Egyptian religion endured so long. It could hold difference without collapsing it. It could allow local pride, temple identity, and wider cosmological unity to coexist. A priest in one city might emphasize one god. A priest in another might elevate another. The myths did not need to erase each other, they could remain in conversation. There is something graceful in that, something almost musical. Different voices, one civilization, and even within the same place the stories could shift over time. New political powers rose, dynasties changed, foreign influences entered, kings built temples and restored old ones. Scribes copied older texts, sometimes preserving a tradition that had already become ancient in their own day. This layering is part of the beauty of Egyptian myth. It is not a single polished sculpture. It is a landscape of repeated meaning, one generation setting down another generation's reverence. When we call these creation myths, we should imagine not only a beginning in time, but a beginning in memory. The stories explain where the world came from, yes, but they also explain why the world remains intelligible, why the sun comes back, why names matter, why the dead are remembered, why the river is sacred, and why perhaps a story can be told many times in many temples and still feel complete. The old world has room for variation, and that room itself feels peaceful. It is a reminder that not every truth must be narrow to be steady. When we imagine Egyptian myths today, we often picture them as books or museum labels, as objects of study separated from daily life. But for the ancient Egyptians, these stories were alive in ritual. Temple ceremonies maintained divine presence. Festival processions moved sacred images through public spaces. Priests performed daily acts of care. Offerings were prepared. Incense drifted. Hymns were spoken. The world of the gods and the world of human order were kept in contact through repetition. This is important because it means creation myths were not distant tales told only about the remote past. They were also templates for present action. The first dawn mattered because every dawn echoed it. The first mound mattered because sacred spaces could imitate it. The first speaking mattered because prayers could still participate in its power. Egyptian temples were often laid out with deep symbolic attention. Some elements may have represented the primeval mound, or the waters of creation, or the path from disorder into ordered holiness. The architecture itself could become a map of cosmology. And yet one should not imagine this as cold theory. It was lived experience. The sound of sandals on stone, the smell of offerings, the coolness of inner chambers, the bright exterior light fading into dim sanctuary spaces. These details mattered to the people moving through them. A creation myth becomes more intimate when one thinks of it as a place one can enter. There is a lovely steadiness in this. The universe is not only remembered, it is maintained. The gods are not only honored, they are fed, housed, and ritually addressed. The world is not only described, it is cared for. That caring in Egyptian thought extended even to the dead. Tombs were provisioned, names were preserved. Images were made so that memory could endure. The dead person, properly prepared, could continue in a transformed state. This is one of the most comforting aspects of Egyptian civilization to revisit slowly. So much effort went into continuity. Continuity of kingship, continuity of ritual, continuity of the sun, continuity of memory. The myths of creation sit at the center of that continuity, like a quiet fire at the center of a house, though here the fire is the first light, and the house is the ordered world. And because the myth is so intertwined with daily and sacred practice, it never quite becomes dusty. It remains warm with use. One can almost imagine the story being renewed each morning, not by loud proclamation, but by the simple fact of the sun appearing again. The myth says what the dawn already seems to say. And the dawn, in turn, confirms the myth. They belong to each other. It may help as we keep listening to return once more to the geography of Egypt itself. The Nile was not just a backdrop for civilization. It was one of the central reasons the Egyptian imagination took the shape that it did. The river's annual flood left rich soil. It made agriculture possible. It linked settlements. It marked time. The difference between the black silted land and the red desert was visually striking, and that distinction became part of the symbolic landscape of Egyptian thought. Life clustered where water made life possible. Beyond that lay the margins, the places of uncertainty, the places from which disorder might approach. Creation myths often reflect the world in which they arise, and Egyptian myths are deeply riverine. The first waters of Nun may be cosmic, but they echo the real presence of water in the land. The first mound echoes the practical and symbolic importance of dry ground emerging from inundation. The cosmic beginning feels rooted in the local environment. This gives the myths a special texture. They are grand but not removed. They are celestial but also agricultural. One can imagine a farmer watching the flood recede and seeing in that retreat a small image of creation. One can imagine a priest in a temple, looking at a sacred mound or ritual basin and remembering the deep water before the world. One can imagine a scribe tracing signs that themselves carry the weight of that long continuity. Egyptian life was full of correspondence. Earthly things echoed divine things. The sky had a body, the river had a rhythm, the sun had a path, the king had a sacred role, the dead had a journey. The gods, in turn, were not remote abstractions but participant powers in this woven order. Even the simplest image could become layered. A reed, a boat, a floodplain, a mound of earth, a star at dawn. Each of these could be ordinary and cosmic at once. That is part of the calm beauty of Egyptian mythology. It does not always separate the immense from the familiar. It lets them rest close together. And when one listens to the creation stories in that spirit, they begin to feel less like puzzles and more like landscapes. Not something to solve quickly, something to walk through slowly, something that changes subtly with the light. As we near the end of our slow walk through Egyptian creation myths, it is worth noticing how much of their power lies in restraint. The stories do not explain everything all at once. They circle, they repeat, they vary by place. They return to a few enduring images: water, first land, sky, earth, sun, speech, hiddenness, order, renewal. These are simple ingredients, but they remain rich because they are arranged with care. A god rises from the waters, a mound appears, the sun begins its voyage, the sky separates from the earth, names are spoken, order takes shape, and then every day the pattern continues. This may be one reason the myths still feel alive after so many centuries. They are not only old beliefs preserved in stone, they are ways of paying attention. They ask us to notice beginnings but also returns. They ask us to see the ordinary world as something that repeats sacred shapes. When dawn arrives, it is not only morning, it is a reminder. When a name is spoken, it is not only sound, it is presence. When the river rises and falls, when the stars turn, when the body sleeps and wakes, there is a rhythm that Egyptian thought would have recognized immediately. In the end, perhaps the deepest calm in these myths comes from their trust that the cosmos is not random. It is ordered, even if that order must be continually preserved. It is knowable, even if it is not fully visible. It is ancient, but never entirely past. And so the old creation stories remain, softly lit like temple walls in the early morning before the crowds arrive. Water before form, light before color, silence before the first word. If you are listening now as the night grows heavier, you may feel those old images settling gently around you. The world once emerged from stillness, and perhaps stillness in its own way remains the place where all good stories begin. So let the first waters drift away. Let the sunboat continue its patient course. Let the names of the gods rest in memory. And let the quiet order of the night hold you for a little while longer as the ancient world softly fades into sleep. The first thing to remember is that Egyptian creation was never just one story. It was many stories, told in different places at different times, by people who lived among temples, riverbanks, deserts, and old cities whose names were already ancient when later dynasties looked back upon them. Egypt was not a single voice, it was a chorus. And in that chorus, the creation myths do not argue so much as circle one another, each keeping a slightly different kind of silence between its words. At Heliopolis, there was the great image of the self-risen sun god emerging from the waters, turning the first light toward the world. At Hermopolis, there was the older mood of hidden waters and the 8 primeval gods, a small and strange company moving before the world had settled into its later forms. At Memphis, creation became associated with thought and speech, with the heart and tongue of Ptah shaping existence through an act of divine intention. At Thebes, hiddenness itself became sacred, and Ammon, the concealed one, carried within him the mystery of beginnings that could not be fully seen. These are not competing in the way modern stories sometimes compete. They are like several lamps set in different rooms of one large house. Each gives a distinct warmth, each illuminates a different corner. And between them the darkness remains respectfully intact. The Egyptians seem to have understood that origins are not always simple. A river has many sources, a kingdom has many layers, a city stands on older foundations, a name may survive after the language that first spoke it has gone quiet. So too with the beginning of the world. It could be approached from the angle of water, or light, or speech, or concealment, or the first hill emerging from the flood. The first hill is especially beautiful as an image because it feels both humble and immense. It is only a mound, and yet it is everything. It is the first place where the world can rest. It is the first dry ground. It is the first shape that resists the endlessness of the waters. One can imagine the earliest Egyptians watching the annual flood and seeing in each retreat a small reenactment of creation. The mud would settle, the land would reappear, the outline of the world would become legible again. That same pattern, repeated year after year, may have made the myth feel less like a distant legend and more like a memory written into the earth. It is quiet to think that sacred ideas may have grown from such observations, not from dramatic revelation alone, but from patient attention, from the way dawn arrives almost without announcing itself, from the way a seed breaks open, from the way the river changes the landscape but does not destroy it, from the way life returns after apparent disappearance. Egyptian mythology often held on to this kind of repeatable wonder. The first dawn was not only a single moment lost in the far past, it was also something renewed every morning. The sun did not simply rise once and vanish into irretrievable history. It rose again and again, carrying the memory of that first emergence. This gave the cosmos a daily intimacy. Creation was not sealed away. It was ongoing. That ongoing quality can feel deeply comforting. A world that is continually renewed is a world with rhythm. A world with rhythm can be trusted more easily than a world of pure accident. The ancient Egyptians seem to have lived inside this conviction, and their myths reflect it with remarkable calm. Even when they speak of chaos, it is chaos that can be named. Even when they speak of darkness, it is darkness from which light repeatedly returns. There is also something very gentle in the Egyptian habit of linking creation with bodily images. The earth may be male or female, the sky may arch as a great goddess, the sun may travel like a living being, the atmosphere may be held by a god whose body is a boundary between upper and lower realms. These are not cold abstractions, they are intimate metaphors made from what a person can sense directly: breath, heat, skin, posture, voice, movement. And because of that, the myths feel inhabited. One can almost imagine the first humans in these stories looking up at the night sky and feeling the immeasurable dark above them, then watching the first line of morning arrive at the horizon. In that thin, bright edge between dark and day, there is something like a beginning even now. The eye can rest there. The mind can soften there. The whole body seems to understand that dawn is a crossing. The Egyptian sun god crosses many times, across the sky by day, through the underworld by night, through danger, renewal, and secrecy. This circular journey is one of the most tranquil yet profound features of Egyptian religious imagination. The world is not only created once and left behind, it must be traversed, reaffirmed, relit. The sun's voyage through the hours becomes a cosmic model for endurance. There is a great deal of serenity in that idea, not because it denies hardship, but because it places hardship inside a larger pattern. Night is real, but not final. The underworld is real, but not empty. The sun may disappear, yet it is not lost. In a culture so attentive to tombs, coffins, funerary texts, and the preservation of names, this mattered enormously. Death itself was not necessarily the opposite of order. It was one of the regions through which order had to travel. That may be why Egyptian creation stories and Egyptian mortuary beliefs feel so closely related. To speak about the first dawn is also, in a sense, to speak about hope after darkness. To imagine the first emergence from waters is also to imagine a later emergence from the silence of the tomb. The The same symbolic language can stretch across cosmic time and personal fate. If one lingers with that idea, the ancient Egyptian landscape begins to seem full of thresholds. The eastern horizon, the western horizon, the riverbank, the edge of the desert, the boundary of temple and court, the doorway of the tomb, the line where water meets reeds, the line where stars disappear into day. Egyptian thought often dwells at such edges where one state becomes another without any sudden violence. Transition itself becomes sacred. There is a softness in that, a respect for gradual turning, and perhaps that is one reason Egyptian art and religion often feel so composed. The figures stand in profile, the lines are clear, the gods are recognizable, the world is arranged with an almost ceremonial steadiness. This visual order does not erase mystery, it frames it. It gives mystery a place to rest. The same can be said of creation myth. It gives the unknown a shape without pretending to exhaust it. The none remains vast and immeasurable. The first mound is only a sign of what was there before. The self-created God is an origin that no earlier cause can easily contain. Hiddenness remains hidden, yet the myth allows a person to stand near it quietly without fear. It is interesting that several Egyptian creation traditions begin not with a battle, but with a state. A deep, still, undifferentiated expanse. That is not to say there are never conflicts in Egyptian cosmology. There are many, but at the very source, before story takes dramatic form, there is often a suspension, a waiting, a latency, a hush before articulation. This is different from some other ancient mythologies in which creation may follow combat, violence, or the severing of a prior being. In Egypt, the first emphasis often falls on emergence, on speech, on self-arising, on a God who becomes visible, on a world that takes shape as if remembering itself. That memory-like quality is compelling. The world is not always presented as manufactured from nothing in a purely mechanical sense. It is more like something latent becoming apparent, something wet becoming dry, something hidden becoming named, something potential becoming ordered, and names in Egyptian thought matter enormously. To know a name was to know a being more deeply. To speak a name was to make a presence active. Divine names carried nuance, local identity, and layered meaning. A god could have many titles, each expressing a different aspect of function or mystery. This is part of why Egyptian theology can seem so spacious. It is not simplistic in its identity. It is relational, situational, and symbolic. Ammon, for example, the hidden one, can feel almost like a theological pause. The name itself acknowledges concealment. It admits that the deepest source cannot be pinned down easily. And yet this concealment is not absence, it is potency. It is the invisible fullness from which forms emerge. In a bedtime mood, that idea has a lovely stillness to it. The unseen is not empty, it is quietly occupied by possibility. Likewise, Tar at Memphis offers a different kind of stillness. Instead of water or hiddenness, the emphasis falls on thought and speech. The heart conceives, the tongue gives form. Creation becomes an intellectual and verbal act, but not in a cold modern sense. It is a living intelligence, a sacred utterance that brings order into articulation. This is an image that honors craftsmanship, architecture, and the subtle discipline of making. It suits a city associated with artisans and the shaping of durable things. One can almost feel the connection between divine speech and human craft. A mason fitting stone to stone, a scribe aligning signs on papyrus, a carpenter smoothing a surface, a priest reciting a formula, a king issuing a decree. In each case, sound and intention become structure. These myths therefore reflect not only cosmic imagination, but a civilization's practical life. Egypt was a society of building, measuring, recording, and preserving. Its monuments endured because they were designed to endure. Its inscriptions carried memory across generations. Its rituals depended on exact words and ordered gestures. Creation itself, in mythic form, sometimes resembles the work of an accomplished builder. And yet the builder is divine, and the materials are primeval. Water, clay, light, breath, word. It is remarkable how much can be made from so few ingredients. There is also a deep and persistent Egyptological mystery in the way these traditions were transmitted and transformed over time. Some creation ideas may be very old, perhaps older than the surviving texts that preserve them. Others likely developed within priestly schools as theological reflection matured over centuries. Temple traditions were not frozen. They evolved, sometimes subtly, sometimes substantially, as political centers shifted and local cults gained or lost prominence. A city's god might rise in influence. A dynasty might favor one temple over another. A priestly interpretation might be written into a hymn or ritual text, then copied and copied again. A funerary spell might preserve a very old image long after its original context had changed. In this way, Egyptian mythology is like a stratified ruin. Different eras lie close together, not neatly separated. A later age may preserve an older voice inside its own language. That is part of what makes it feel so ancient in the deepest sense. Not simply old, but layered, like stone polished by many hands, like a shore where many floods have left their trace. It is easy to imagine a traveler along the Nile seeing this layering everywhere. Old temples reused by later kings. Broken statues repurposed in new walls. Name cartouches chiseled over and replaced. City mounds rising over forgotten settlements. Desert cemeteries holding inscriptions from different periods. The land itself is a palimpsest, and creation myths too are palimpsests of thought. The mythic beginning, then, is not a single point but a cluster of remembered gestures. The first water, the first land, the first god, the first word, the first light, the first separation, the first ordering. A person can sit with those images slowly and feel no need to force them into a single scheme. Their plurality is part of their strength. Egyptian religion had room for local difference, for theological nuance, for mythic diversity. This is perhaps one reason it seems both specific and timeless. It does not flatten experience too quickly. There is something almost geological about this, like a series of ancient deposits, each one formed under different conditions. Some are close to the river, some lie deep in the desert, some were exposed by time, some remained buried. Yet together they tell a story of continuity that was always changing. The first dawn in this context becomes a kind of master image. Dawn is transformation without abruptness. It is the slow return of visibility. It allows the eye to adjust. It softens edges. It reveals shapes one by one. The Egyptian creation stories often move with this same patience. Even when they describe the birth of gods, they do so with a stately unfolding. The sun itself is perhaps the most familiar sacred body in Egyptian thought, but it is worth lingering with the emotional texture of that familiarity. The sun is not only power, it is reassurance. It is the thing that comes back. It is the golden logic of the day. It touches tomb walls, field edges, limestone cliffs, river water, and painted wood. It transforms all of them without asking permission. And because it returns every morning, it can become a symbol of cosmic faithfulness. For people living beside the Nile, that regularity must have felt especially precious. The flood, the planting, the harvest, the dry season, the heat, the stars, the ritual calendar, the movement of festivals through the year, all of these would have placed daily life inside a larger patterned order. The creation myth is not separate from this pattern. It gives it a source. In ancient Egyptian temples, ritual often reenacted cosmic renewal. The act of opening a shrine, presenting offerings, reciting hymns, and awakening a god's image in the morning had a quiet parallel to the dawn itself. The temple could be understood as a carefully maintained center of creation, a place where order was refreshed, where divine presence was made available to human attention, where the first light could be remembered and honored. This is one of the reasons temple ritual feels so unlike spectacle. It is more like maintenance of the universe, measured, repetitive, patient, the kind of sacred work that happens best without hurry. And because the Egyptians invested so deeply in preservation, their mythic beginnings were constantly accompanied by memory. Memory of ancestors, Memory of kings, memory of old names, memory of sacred forms. This is another profound quietness in the tradition, the belief that what was established at the beginning should be cared for through time. Not every culture frames continuity in this way. But in Egypt, continuity itself can feel almost like a sacred substance. The world is held together by repeated recognition, by correct naming, by ritual attention, by the maintenance of boundaries. The cosmos is not left to drift. Even the image of Maat, though not a creation deity in the narrow sense, belongs here with great force. Maat is order, truth, balance, right relation. She is what allows the world to remain world-like. The sun's path, the social hierarchy, the justice of the court, the integrity of speech, the moral life of the individual, the stability of the kingdom, all are in some way related to her presence. A creation that begins in order is also a creation that must continue to be ordered. That does not make it rigid, it makes it careful, and care has its own softness. One can almost hear in the background of these myths the slow work of ancient scribes. Read pens moving over papyrus, ink drying in the warm air, formal phrases copied from older models, hymns recorded in tombs and temples, lists of divine names, formulae for guidance through the underworld. Cosmological allusions embedded in prayers and offering scenes. The scripts themselves are a kind of bridge between the human and the eternal. There is tenderness in the fact that so much of what we know survives because someone once took the trouble to write it down. Someone made marks so that a god's name would not vanish. Someone recorded a ritual so it could be repeated. Someone inscribed a creation image inside a tomb so the dead might remember how the world began. The tomb, too, becomes part of the same imagination. It is not merely an endpoint, it can be a place of transformation, protection, and passage. Egyptian burial architecture often evokes enclosure and continuity. The chambers are arranged with precision, the walls speak. The dead are not simply forgotten, they are equipped. This too is an extension of creation logic. The afterlife is not wholly separate from the cosmos that dawn first made visible. It belongs to the same ordered whole. There is something especially restful in this idea, even though it is distant from modern habits of thought. To be placed within an order larger than one's own brief span, to be remembered by name, to travel by known pathways, to be greeted by familiar divine forms, that is a deeply human longing. Egyptian myth gave that longing a landscape, and the landscape was not abstract. It was full of rivers, marshes, shores, sunbeams, stars, cattle, falcons, lotuses, and stones. A living geography. The lotus in particular offers another beautiful image of emergence. A flower that opens with the day, closes with the night, and rises from water with quiet elegance. It appears in art and myth as a symbol of birth, rebirth, and unfolding. It is both delicate and enduring. Its connection to the sun made it a fitting emblem of dawn, a bloom opening as the light comes. A small earthly mirror of cosmic beginning. Such symbols work because they are felt in the body. One does not need to force them. The eye sees the flower, the mind remembers the sun, the heart notices the resemblance and rests in it. Egyptian myths excel at this kind of resemblance. They do not over-explain. They let one image resonate into another. Water becomes potential. Land becomes stability. Light becomes revelation. Speech becomes creation. Hiddenness becomes sacred depth. A mound becomes the first world, and because the stories are so old, they carry the astonishing weight of endurance. Their beginnings were told when the monuments, now ancient, were still new. Later generations inherited them, reinterpreted them, copied them, and sometimes altered them. The Nile kept flowing, the temples endured, the dynasties rose and fell, foreign powers arrived, new languages spread, yet some of the old shapes remained. The first dawn continued to be meaningful. There is a quiet dignity in that survival, not a loud triumph but a persistence. The kind of persistence seen in carved stone after wind and time have done their work. The kind found in a ruined colonnade where sunlight still falls across worn reliefs. The kind found in a name remembered by specialists, pilgrims, and curious listeners long after the city that uttered it has changed beyond recognition. The ancients, of course, did not know they were ancient in the way we now mean it. They were living in their own present, yet they inherited their own past with seriousness. A king would restore a temple in an old style. A priest might preserve an archaic hymn because its age itself carried authority. A myth could be old and still alive. In some ways, this is the essence of Egyptian religious culture. The past was never merely past. It remained active in forms of reverence and repetition. This gives the creation myths their special emotional color. They are not nostalgic in a modern sense because they do not mourn a lost golden age from the outside. They keep the beginning present by ritual and recitation. The first time remains close by. Dawn can touch it. Perhaps that is why the myths feel so suitable for bedtime. They are full of repetition but not boredom, full of darkness but not menace, full of immense scale but held by order. They invite the mind to slow down and to trust pattern. Imagine the first dawn again, not as a sudden theatrical flash, but as a gradual brightening over a very old landscape. The river is still. The banks are pale with early light. The desert beyond is cool and nearly colorless. The horizon begins to edge with gold. A bird stirs. The air changes. The world which had been hidden becomes available again. The Egyptians knew this experience every day, and they gave it sacred depth. The sun god's rising was not only a physical event, it was a cosmic assurance that emergence is possible, that what seems submerged may return, that hiddenness may give way to form, that the world is not finished with itself. In that spirit, even the oldest myths seem to breathe quietly. The Nun is never just a primitive void. It is a living vastness. The first island is never just dirt. It is a platform for life and meaning. The sky goddess is not only a shape. She is protection and distance and beauty. The sun is not only a ball of fire. It is a path, a king, a heartbeat of the cosmos. One could spend a long time simply dwelling in those correspondences. Water and womb, horizon and doorway, light and understanding, speech and being, mound and refuge, hiddenness and possibility. All of them are gentle ways of translating the same old wonder, that anything exists at all and that it can be seen. There is perhaps no need to hurry beyond that wonder. We can think of the ancient priests and scholars who refined these traditions over long stretches of time. They lived in temple courts and administrative centers, among storerooms, archives, sacred lakes, painted columns, and cultivated grounds. Their world was built from practical concerns, but they also guarded symbolic ones. They knew that ceremonies had to be repeated with accuracy. They knew that gods required names, houses, offerings, and attention. They knew that memory could be embodied in architecture and text, and so their cosmologies became part of the physical environment. A temple was not merely a building dedicated to worship. It was a map of the universe. The sanctuary might represent the first mound or the hidden place of emergence. The processional routes could echo divine journeys. Ceiling paintings might suggest the sky. Floors could suggest the earth. Sacred lakes might recall the primeval waters. Every element carried layered significance. It is a remarkable kind of world building, though that phrase feels too modern and too playful for such solemn artistry. Still, the effect is the same. The whole place speaks in symbols. A visitor does not merely enter a structure. They enter an ordered cosmos. From this perspective, Egyptian creation myths are not remote tales about a distant past. They are blueprints for living inside a meaningful present. They explain where the world came from, yes, but also how it should be maintained, interpreted, and honored. They link the earliest dawn to the daily life of a kingdom. They make cosmic beginnings available in ritual form. That availability is perhaps one of the most soothing things about them. The beginning is not locked away. The beginning is present in dawn, in speech, in the river's return, in the temple's morning rite, in the rhythm of stars and seasons, in the careful preservation of names. The first dawn, then, is not only a mythic event, it is a mode of attention, to notice the first light, to recognize emergence, to respect what comes out of stillness, to understand that order can be renewed without fanfare. These are quiet lessons, and they sit gently inside the myths. We might even say that the myths teach a kind of spiritual listening, a readiness for subtle change, a trust that what is hidden may be preparing to appear, a willingness to sit with water, shadow, and silence until shape returns. That is a very old wisdom, and if it should meet the listener tonight as sleep approaches, it may do so softly, not as doctrine but as atmosphere, not as insistence but as shelter. The first waters are no longer threatening, they are simply deep. The first dawn does not rush, it arrives. The old gods, too, feel less like distant rulers than like enduring patterns of presence. Sun in its boat, the hidden one in his concealment, the artisan god in his thought and speech, the sky goddess curving overhead, the earth beneath, the sacred hill, the ordered path, they remain in memory as a kind of ancient architecture of meaning. And across all of it, the Nile continues in imagination, calm and constant, carrying silt, reflection, and life. It is easy to see why the river became inseparable from creation thought. It was not merely water, it was the rhythm of a civilization. It linked past and future, it fertilized the land, it marked time, it made settlement possible. In a world so dependent on its rise and fall, the river itself must have seemed to possess a deep and almost divine intelligence. Yet the myths do not simply deify nature, they make nature intelligible within a sacred order. This is a subtle distinction. The river is not just worshipped in itself, it is read as part of a larger cosmological pattern. The world becomes legible because it is inhabited by meaningful powers, and perhaps that is the final softness of Egyptian creation thought. It makes the world feel inhabited rather than empty. The waters are full of possibility, the sky is full of divine travel, the earth is full of sacred memory, the sun is full of return, even silence is full of hidden life. When the night becomes very still, it may be comforting to remember that many cultures once looked at the same darkening world and understood it not as emptiness, but as a threshold. The Egyptians, with their patient myths of emergence, taught that thresholds matter, that what lies before form is not nothing, that what appears at dawn has been prepared in the dark. So let the darkness remain a little longer, gentle and untroubled. Let the river of stars move slowly overhead. Let the first mound rest beneath the imagined waters. Let the sunboat continue its timeless course. Let the hidden god remain hidden and still near. Let the heart and tongue of creation speak in silence. Let the old names stay luminous in memory. And let the first dawn, which never entirely passed away, settle softly around you now, as the ancient world grows quiet and sleep begins to gather like light on the horizon. In the long Egyptian imagination, dawn is never only a clock face moment. It is a daily reenactment of the world's deepest story. The sun does not merely rise because time has moved on. It rises because the world is still being sustained. Each morning becomes a mild and luminous proof that order can be restored, that darkness can be crossed, that the hidden can return in form. This idea may have been felt most strongly in places where the horizon was wide and clear. In the desert, the edge of the world seems almost visible. The sky can meet the land in a line so clean that the eye begins to expect revelation there. It is easy to imagine ancient watchers waiting in that pale interval before sunrise, when the stars are thinning and the air is not yet warm, and the first suggestion of gold begins to touch the east. They would have known the interval well. They would have lived inside it year after year with a familiarity that made it no less remarkable. The Egyptian myths give that interval a name in the language of beginnings. They do not treat it as a random hour. They make it sacred. They say, in effect, that every morning repeats the first morning in a quieter key. There is a kind of tenderness in that thought. Nothing is lost entirely. The beginning can be revisited. The world can remember how to emerge. And it is worth pausing with that word, emerge. In these myths, emergence is never violent. It does not need thunder. It is often pictured as swelling, unfolding, lifting, shining, surfacing. It is more like a bud opening than a machine starting. That image suits the Egyptian sense of creation so well. The cosmos does not need to be forced into being. It grows into visibility from within a sacred stillness. The stillness itself matters. Before the first discernible shape there is none, the watery deep. None is not a simple blankness. It is fullness without form, abundance without arrangement, a vast potential that has not yet chosen a structure. This is one of the quiet beauties of Egyptian thought. The beginning is not a barren void. It is a rich and latent expanse. Creation is not the filling of emptiness, but the ordering of possibility. In some versions, the first mound rises from none like a tiny island after floodwaters recede. In others, the cosmic hill appears as if thought itself has become place. The image of land rising from water is especially intimate to a river civilization. The annual flooding of the Nile made such scenes visible in smaller earthly ways. Fields reappeared, mud banks emerged, boundaries returned. What had been covered became usable again. The world in miniature seemed to be created each year. Perhaps that is why Egyptian creation stories feel so grounded even while they are so vast. They draw their metaphors from the patient facts of daily life. Water gives way to land, light follows darkness, breath enters the body. A name is spoken and a thing becomes present. The myths do not float above experience. They arise from it, as if the ordinary world itself had been quietly whispering cosmology. At Heliopolis, the city associated with solar theology, creation became especially linked to the sun god and his self-arising. The name Atum suggests completion and fullness, and yet Atum is also the one who comes into being alone before company, before the divisions of the world have taken shape. In the Heliopolitan story, Atum stands on the primeval mound and begins the ordering of existence. He creates through gesture, through generation, through speech, through the unfolding of divine relations. From the first presence come other presences. The universe becomes familial before it becomes fully worldly. There is something almost meditative in this sequence. Existence is not presented as a sudden mechanical event. It is presented as relation. One becomes two, and from two comes further relation, until plurality fills the spaces between sky and earth. The myth is not merely about origins, it is about connectedness. It says that the cosmos is not a heap of separate parts. It is a web of lineage, echo, and continuity. That same sense of continuity is preserved in temple ritual. Egyptian temples were not simply places to gather. They were, in a sense, carefully maintained points of contact between creation and the created world. Every morning in the sanctuary, when the statue of the deity was tended, dressed, purified, and offered food, the ritual could be understood as a renewal of the cosmic order. The god was awakened, honored, and made present. The ceremony echoed the sun's own return. A small sacred chamber became a model of the world at its first awakening. This does not mean that everyone experienced the ritual in the same way, or that every participant would have reflected on the deepest theology behind it, but the structure itself mattered. The daily actions repeated a larger truth. Order requires care. The divine presence is maintained through attention. The world is not self-evidently secure. It is sustained through right relationship. One can think of this in a very calm and human way. If a home is kept tidy, if a lamp is lit at the right time, if bread is set aside, if water is drawn, there is a feeling that the world has been gently gathered together. Temple ritual enlarged that feeling until it touched the sky. It made cosmic maintenance feel as measured and practical as domestic care. The universe, too, has its gestures of tending. The Egyptian gods themselves often seem to exist in this register of tender responsibility. Ra travels, Thoth records, Maat balances, Osiris is remembered, Isis gathers and restores, Horus inherits and protects, Anubis guides the dead with quiet fidelity. None of these figures is merely symbolic in a narrow sense. Each one belongs to a network of duties that hold the world in place. Maat especially is central to the mood of Egyptian cosmology. She is truth, balance, rightness, and cosmic harmony, but also something gentler than abstraction. Her feather is light. Her presence is measured. She is not noisy. She is the principle by which things remain appropriately ordered, and she appears in myth, in lore, in kingship, in moral life, and in the conduct of the dead. To live according to Maat was to align oneself with the grain of existence rather than against it. The idea is beautifully quiet. The world works best when it is not forced. The sun follows a path. The seasons recur. The river returns. The proper word is spoken. The proper offering is made. The proper burial is remembered. Maat is a kind of moral weather, and it feels as natural as a clear sky at dawn. Yet Egyptian creation myths are not only calm, they also contain gestures of struggle, separation, and necessary distinction. To make a world, one must divide. Sky and earth must be parted, waters must be bounded, names must be assigned, the formlessness of none must yield to the lines of things. This division is not tragic in the usual sense, but it is not entirely effortless either. Something of the undifferentiated deep is left behind when order takes shape. Creation means that not everything can remain together. There is a subtle sadness in that, though it is often softened by the beauty of the result. The sky is high, the earth is stable, the stars have their courses, but the first wholeness has been articulated into parts. Ancient myths often understand this well. The birth of a world is also the birth of distance. The sky no longer lies on the earth. Humans are separate from the gods, even if still linked to them by ritual and memory. Life itself becomes possible, and yet life is always unfolding within a gap that creation has opened. This gap appears in many forms in Egyptian tradition. It appears between life and death, which is why funerary practice is so elaborate and so careful. It appears between the visible and the invisible, which is why names, images, and spells matter. It appears between the king and the gods, which is why pharaonic authority is wrapped in sacred language. The Egyptian world is one where separation does not mean abandonment, but it does mean the need for bridges. And bridges are everywhere in the myths. The sun boat moves from east to west and through the underworld, carrying light across regions the human eye cannot follow. The dead travel under guidance. The soul is preserved through rites and texts. The pyramid, the tomb, the temple, and the shrine each serve as a kind of crossing point, a place where one realm touches another without fully becoming it. It is difficult not to feel a certain serenity in this architecture of transitions. The Egyptians did not imagine permanence as simple stasis. They imagined it as continuous renewal. The tomb is not merely a sealed chamber, it is a site of remembered life. The pyramid is not only a monument, it is an ascent encoded in stone. The temple is not just a building. It is an enacted cosmology, standing with the river, the desert, and the sky in a carefully balanced relationship. The same sensibility appears in their treatment of time. Egyptian time is deeply cyclical, but it is not monotonous. Cycles are not repetitions that cancel meaning. They are returns that preserve difference. The Nile floods again, yet not in exactly the same way. The sun rises again, but on a new morning. The king dies, but the office remains. The dead journey onward, but each journey belongs to a particular soul. Repetition becomes a form of continuity rather than a loss of individuality. This makes the myths especially fitting for bedtime listening. A bedtime story lives in the tension between ending and return. The day ends, but sleep begins. Consciousness dims, but dreaming opens. The body rests, yet the mind continues in altered forms. The Egyptians knew, perhaps as intimately as any ancient people, that ending is not always final. The sun sets only to continue beneath the world. The seed falls only to rise in a new season. The dead are laid to rest, yet they are still addressed, remembered, and fed in ritual memory. When we think of Egyptian creation myths in this way, we begin to notice how delicately they join cosmic scale to human routine. A hymn to the rising sun can feel like a prayer for ordinary resilience. A myth about the first mound can feel like a meditation on finding footing after flood. A story of divine speech can become a reminder that words shape the world more than we often realize. Even a simple act of cleansing in a temple or a home can echo the original separation of order from undifferentiated waters. And ancient Egypt was exceptionally attentive to such echoes. Its people lived amid monumental stone, but their myths are not cold. They are warm with continuity, and their sacred architecture often follows lines of light, orientation, and symbolic ascent. The arrangement of temples toward sunrise or toward particular stars suggests a civilization listening closely to the sky. It is as if stone itself had been taught to wait for dawn. There is a haunting beauty in the way Egyptian cosmic thought joins the visible heavens to the invisible past. The stars are not simply distant objects. They are participants in order. Certain stars were associated with the imperishable ones, circling in the northern sky, and thus with a form of eternity. The south and north, east and west, rise and setting, living and dead, were all part of a carefully woven spatial imagination. The universe had directions, and each direction had its own tone. In that world, the sunrise is not generic. It is the eastern promise of return. It is the bark of Ra emerging, often with divine companions carrying light into the day. The sunset is not merely disappearance. It is passage into another realm where renewal continues hidden from sight. The darkness is not a negation but a chamber of transformation. Egyptian myth again and again insists that what is unseen is not absent. This is one reason the underworld traditions are so integral to the larger creation story. The night journey of the sun mirrors the journey through uncertainty before renewal. In some funerary texts, the dead person seeks to join the sun in its movement, to travel safely through the regions of the beyond. These texts are not simply concerned with fear, they are concerned with continuity. The goal is to avoid dissolution, to maintain identity, to remain in relation to the cosmic cycle. One can imagine these texts not as dramatic pronouncements, but as careful and reassuring companions. They name gates, guardians, regions, spells, and means of passage. They preserve knowledge of how to move through darkness without losing the way. For listeners today, this may feel less like spectacle than like a compassionate cartography. The unknown is mapped with ritual patience. That patience is visible everywhere in Egyptian tradition. It is visible in the long labor of tomb construction. It is visible in the copying of texts across generations. It is visible in the devotion to preserving names and titles. It is visible in the way myths themselves develop through variation rather than abrupt replacement. Over centuries, local gods could merge, attributes could shift, and stories could interlace. Creation could be told through different theological lenses, and yet the underlying reverence for emergence remained. In some places, the creator is more avian in imagery, a bird rising from the waters. In others, the first act of creation comes through word, or through the shaping of the earth, or through self-generation. The variations do not cancel each other. They make the tradition feel alive, as if many communities were looking at the same dawn from different banks of the river and telling what they saw in their own accents. The myths are not rigid formulas. They are living reflections of a civilization's relationship to mystery. This plurality is itself calming. It suggests that no single image can fully contain the beginning. The first dawn is too subtle, too vast, too old for one account alone. So the Egyptians spoke of it in multiple ways, and in speaking they kept the beginning near. A creator could be a god who rises alone, a god who fashions with speech, a god who emerges from lotus bloom, a child on a primordial hill, a life force in the egg, a hidden artisan, a luminous bird, a sun traveling through the sky, or a sacred balance being restored. Each image is different, each one is gentle in its own way. The lotus especially carries a remarkable softness in Egyptian symbolism. It closes at night and opens with the morning light, which made it an apt image of rebirth and solar emergence. There is no need to imagine this as an overly dramatic sign. It is quiet, botanical, almost modest, yet it holds a profound mythic resonance. The flower knows the rhythm of darkness and return. It participates in a tiny way in the first dawn each day. Similarly, the scarab beetle became a symbol of renewal because of its habit of rolling its ball of earth, a motion that could be seen as mirroring the sun's movement across the sky. The image is simple, almost humble, and that humility is part of its power. The Egyptians found divinity not only in grand thunderous events, but in recurring patterns of life that could be observed by anyone who paused long enough to notice. The world itself offered signs. This habit of attentive observation is one of the deepest pleasures of Egyptian thought. It is not merely mythic imagination untethered from reality. It is imagination nourished by the specifics of environment, craft, and season. The color of the river at flood, the heat on stone, the passage of birds, the alignment of stars, the growth of grain, the labor of scribes, the fragrance of resin in ritual spaces, the stillness of tomb chambers, the gold of funerary masks, the pale opening of dawn over the desert. All of this becomes part of a symbolic world that is rich but never frantic. Even the dead in such a world are not remote in a cold sense. They remain close through the keeping of memory. Tomb paintings show feasting, fishing, offering, music, and harvest. These scenes are not simply decorative. They are continuations of life in ideal and protected form. They suggest that the afterlife is not a blank elsewhere, but a transformed persistence of the familiar. The person continues amid fields, waters, companions, and offerings, sheltered by care. That continuity reaches back to creation itself. If the world began in care, then it is fitting that the dead should be cared for. If the first dawn was an act of emergence, then burial rites become acts of preservation and guidance. If the universe was made through balance, then the living must maintain balance with the ancestors, the gods, and the invisible order. Nothing is isolated. Everything belongs to a long chain of tending. There is also a beautiful seriousness in the Egyptian concern with naming. To know the name of a being was not merely to label it. It was to recognize its essence, its standing, its place in the cosmos. Names had power because words had weight. Speech was part of creation. This is one of the most graceful ideas in the myths, that language is not an afterthought to reality, but one of the means by which reality takes shape. In a bedtime mood that can feel deeply comforting, the act of speaking softly, of naming gently, can itself become a kind of ordering. One names the river, the sun, the stars, the god, the hall, the field, the boat, the night, and each name holds the thing still for a moment. The Egyptians, with their inscriptions and liturgies, seem to understand this almost physically. The world is kept alive not only by force, but by correct and loving address. This may be one reason why the surviving monuments feel so intimate despite their scale. The Great Pyramids, the colossi, the pylons, and the carved chambers are not merely expressions of power. They are acts of memory made solid. They speak of kingship, yes, but also of continuity between human labor and cosmic permanence. They remind us that a civilization can strive to be as enduring as the stars, while still remaining profoundly aware of mortality. And mortality is never far from Egyptian creation thought. To begin is also to be finite. To rise from none is to inhabit form, and form is vulnerable. The sun itself must journey daily through danger and obscurity. The king must die. The body must be transformed. The soul must be protected. The world that emerges from the waters is beautiful precisely because it is not outside time. It belongs to a cycle that includes loss and return, yet the myths refuse despair. They do not say that loss is absolute. They say that transformation is possible. The waters do not merely swallow, they also yield. The night does not merely consume, it also shelters passage. The dead do not merely vanish, they enter a different mode of existence. The first dawn is not a one-time exception, but an everlasting pattern of renewal. This pattern is perhaps most moving in the figure of the sun god as he travels. Ra is at once visible and invisible, present and moving, triumphant and vulnerable. In the daytime, he is the bright sovereign of the sky. In the night, he continues his voyage through underworld spaces, where other divine and monstrous figures may appear in the texts as obstacles, tests, or passages. But even this is not presented in a tone of simple terror. It is a journey through the hidden portion of reality, a necessary movement so that dawn may return. There is great calm in imagining the sun as a traveler rather than a static emblem. Travel implies path, rhythm, companions, and destination. It means the light is not trapped. It comes back. The universe is not a closed room. It is a moving vessel. That image can settle the mind. The day proceeds because the journey is faithful. The cosmos keeps its appointments. At the same time, Egypt's religious life did not make the divine fully transparent. Mystery remained. Some origins were obscure by design. Some names were hidden. Some forms were local, layered, or merged through long histories. The ancient cities themselves have often vanished, leaving only fragments, inscriptions, foundations, and later memories. Heliopolis, once brilliant, now survives mostly in echoes. Other sacred centers have been reduced by time to ruins, broken stone, and scattered traces. The silence of such places can be almost more eloquent than their former bustle might have been. Standing in imagination among those remains, one can sense how much of ancient life has gone and how much still lingers. A column base suggests a temple. A cartouche preserves a royal name. A wall fragment shows a hand offering to a god. A burial chamber preserves color against centuries. The desert, in its patient way, both erases and conserves. It strips away the immediate and leaves behind the enduring outline. This is perhaps another reason Egyptian creation myths feel so fitting to the material remains. The myths speak of emergence from waters, yet what survives most vividly to us are stones set against sand, inscriptions against loss, images against time. The civilization has become, for later readers, a kind of afterimage, and yet the afterimage is not weak. It is luminous. It invites interpretation without exhausting itself. That openness keeps the myths alive. There is always another layer, another local tradition, another theological emphasis, another funerary text, another hymn, another temple axis, another piece of iconography that subtly changes the feeling of the whole. Egyptian religion, for all its ancient stability, was never perfectly still. It adapted, it absorbed, it preserved older forms while allowing new ones to gather around them. In this way, it resembles a river with many channels, always the same and never entirely the same. The metaphor of the river may be the gentlest way to hold all of this. A river has a source, but it also has banks, floodplains, eddies, seasonal variations, and a long memory of terrain. It is not simply water moving from one point to another. It is a living pattern across the land. Egyptian thought, shaped by the Nile, seems to know that what matters is not just origin but passage. Creation is not only what happened at the beginning, it is what continues to happen whenever life keeps moving in order. And in the end, perhaps that is the quietest lesson of the first dawn. It is not only about the first moment ever. It is about every moment when shape returns, when the hidden becomes visible, when night gives way to another workable day. The myths tell us that such return is built into the structure of reality. They allow a person to rest in the idea that emergence is trustworthy. The early light of Egypt, imagined through these stories, is not harsh. It is gradual. It touches the edge of the world and then widens. It falls on stone, water, reeds, palms, roofs, and temple walls. It finds the river, it finds the shrine. It finds the road, it finds the sleeper. It does not demand anything dramatic. It simply arrives carrying the old promise of the beginning, so it is possible as the mind grows drowsy to picture the first dawn still unfolding somewhere beyond ordinary time. The waters are deep but not fearful. The mound is small but sufficient. The sun has not yet fully lifted, but it is on its way. The names are spoken softly. The gods keep their places. The river flows with its ancient patience. The sky begins to glow. And from that glow comes a feeling that has lasted across the long distance between the ancient world and this quiet hour, that the universe is not without memory, that light knows how to return, and that even the oldest beginnings can remain near, like a calm presence at the edge of sleep. Let the waters remain gentle, let the mound hold its shape, let the sunboat cross in silence, let the temple doors stand open in the mind and then close softly, let the hidden things stay kind, let the names of earth and sky and river drift like reeds in moonlight, let the first dawn continue, not in haste, but in its own ancient measure. And as the last thought loosens and the night deepens around it, may the world feel once more like it did at the beginning, vast, ordered, luminous, and at rest. Beyond that first dawn, the Egyptian imagination did not leave the world unattended. A beginning, once spoken, had to be carried forward, the light had to be renewed, the waters had to remain in their proper place. The gods, in their many forms, were not only originators but guardians of continuity, and this is one of the most soothing features of the tradition. It suggests that creation is not a single spark thrown into darkness and forgotten. It is maintenance, it is care, it is the steady preservation of a world that might otherwise drift back into indistinction. There is something quietly reassuring in that idea. The cosmos is not pictured as fragile in a helpless way, but as tended. It is worked upon by order, by ritual, by the recurring motion of the heavens, by the Nile as it rises and falls, by priests who recite names and remember sequences, by builders who align stone with the movement of stars and the path of the sun. Even the smallest acts of sacred repetition become part of a larger cosmological rhythm. To speak a name is, in a modest way, to help the thing named remain present. This may be why the Egyptian love of lists, titles, genealogies, and precise divine roles feels so integral rather than dry. The world is made of distinctions. A god of the horizon is not quite the same as a god of the hidden depths. The morning sun is not the evening sun, though both belong to the same eternal circuit. The west is not the east. The river is not the desert. Life is not death, though they are joined by passage and transformation. In a civilization so attentive to boundaries, the clarity of each category becomes part of the beauty. It is a way of honoring the world's shape. At the same time, Egyptian myth is never merely rigid. It contains a remarkable softness beneath its structure. The very image of the Benben, the first mound, is small, humble, and almost intimate. It rises from deep water as something easily overlooked if one were not looking with sacred attention. A single patch of dry land, just enough to stand upon, becomes the stage for the first act of becoming. There is a tenderness in that image. Creation is not all thunder and spectacle. It can begin with a small rise above the flood. The first land itself seems to offer a lesson in scale. From a cosmic perspective, it is tiny. From the perspective of life, it is everything. One can imagine the earliest Egyptian mind standing in a landscape shaped by inundation, where the river's annual rhythm brought both danger and abundance, and finding in that movement a pattern for the cosmos. The flood arrives, the waters cover, then the land reappears. What was hidden returns, what was open becomes fertile. What seemed lost proves to be temporary. Such cycles do not merely support agriculture, they shape metaphysics. They teach the mind to expect renewal. The Nile in this way is not only a river but a calendar of feeling. Its predictability was not simple sameness, it was dependable variation. The inundation came, but not at every moment. The fields were submerged, then revealed. Mud enriched the soil. Canals and basins translated natural movement into human order. Life in ancient Egypt was built around this measured rhythm, and it is not difficult to see why myths of origin would imagine the world beginning in a flood-like expanse. The land was always being won back from water, and the universe could be understood through that patient recovery. Some versions of creation place emphasis on the watery abyss called Nun, not as evil, but as a vast precondition. Nun is not chaos in the sense of malice, it is undifferentiated possibility. It surrounds the world like a deep silence. In some texts, the primeval waters persist beneath the ordered world, ready to receive what dissolves and to yield what comes forth. They are not entirely excluded. They remain there, a reminder that order is something established, not assumed. The world is stable because it has boundaries, but the boundaries stand over an older openness. That older openness gives depth to the thought of emergence. Each sunrise is a victory, but not a violent one. The sun does not conquer a living enemy so much as return from an interval in the dark. The underworld journey of Ra and the battles and protections that accompany it dramatize this return with vivid imagination. Night is not nothingness. It is a passage through concealed regions, through gates, through encounters with beings who threaten the continuity of the light. And yet the sun rises again. The drama of that return can be felt as a theological version of breathing in and out, a cosmic rhythm that says, even now, even after darkness, the world has not forgotten how to open. The Egyptian underworld itself is a place of remarkable complexity. It is not simply a place of punishment, though danger is present there. It is a realm of transformation, geography, and testing. The books that describe it, such as those associated with tombs and temples, map a hidden order beneath ordinary sight. Rivers, caverns, gates, guardians, divine names, and starry zones appear in sequence. The dead do not merely vanish, they travel. They are identified, they are weighed, they are admitted or denied. The journey matters because existence in Egyptian thought is relational. One must know the names that belong to each threshold. Even here in the shadowed halls of the night journey, the mood is not purely grim. There is a kind of solemn privacy in the underworld. It is vast but organized. It is perilous but knowable through correct speech and proper rites. The famous weighing of the heart with the feather of Maat offers one of the most enduring images of Egyptian moral imagination. Truth is weightless, or nearly so. The heart must be light enough to pass. One feels in this image both ethical seriousness and a strange mercy. What matters is not flamboyant virtue, but balance, rightness, the inner alignment of a life. Maat herself is among the most beautiful concepts to emerge from ancient Egypt. She is more than a goddess in the narrow sense. She is order, truth, justice, harmony, right measure. She is what allows the sun to rise, the king to rule, the fields to be cultivated, the dead to rest, and speech to remain meaningful. A world with Maat is a world in which things fit. Not perfectly, not without strain, but sufficiently that life can continue. To imagine creation in Egyptian terms is to imagine the first establishment of Maat against the possibility of drift. And because the Egyptians cared so deeply about continuity, their myths often folded the human ruler into this cosmic structure. The pharaoh was not merely an administrator or a military leader. He was an axis of maintenance, an earthly guarantor of order. In some traditions, he is the son of a god, in others an embodiment of Horus, the living falcon of kingship. His role was to protect borders, ensure offerings, uphold rituals, and keep the country aligned with the larger pattern of heaven. The office was less about personal grandeur than about responsibility carried in public view. A king failed not only himself but the balance of the universe. The monumental architecture of Egypt seems to understand this intuitively. Temples and pyramids are not just large structures. They are encoded orientations, material statements of relationship between earth and sky, life and death, visibility and concealment. The pyramid form itself, whether as a development from the Benben or as a later expression of solar ascent, carries an unusual emotional tone. It is massive, but not ornate in the way later empires might be. It rises with an almost elemental calm. Its sides gather light. Its summit narrows toward a point that seems to listen upward. One can imagine standing in the desert and seeing such a shape hold the sky in silence. The deserts of Egypt contribute their own metaphysical atmosphere. They are not merely empty spaces. They are margins where order meets the unbounded. The desert can preserve, erase, reveal, and hide. It keeps the dead astonishingly intact in some circumstances, and it can swallow cities, paths, and memories in others. It stands beside the river as a necessary contrast. Without the desert, the fertility of the Nile would lose some of its meaning. Without the river, the desert would seem absolute. Together they form a country of tension and balance, and Egyptian thought learned from that landscape with remarkable sensitivity. There is a kind of literary elegance in the way Egyptian myths often permit multiple truths to coexist. Heliopolis can say one thing, Memphis another, Hermopolis a third, and Thebes yet another, without the tradition necessarily needing to collapse into a single universalized account. This is not confusion so much as layered belonging. A city remembers its own sacred center, and the broader civilization allows those centers to remain meaningful. The result is a mythic world that feels more like a constellation than a map. The stars are distinct, but they belong to one sky. That sky was watched carefully. Egyptian astronomy, like much of ancient astronomy, was practical, religious, and poetic all at once. Stars marked time. Seasons were anticipated by celestial appearances. The heliacal rising of Sirius, tied to the Nile's inundation, linked heaven and earth in a cycle of remarkable steadiness. One can imagine the ancient observer looking up before dawn and seeing a single bright point return after absence, understanding that the world itself was keeping a promise. The sky was not random, it was speaking in intervals. The decans, those star groups used in timekeeping, remind us that ancient Egypt paid attention to the night in ways that modern life often misses. The night sky was not an empty ceiling. It was a field of order, a clock of living lights, a companion to the hidden hours. Between one decan and the next, time could be counted in subtle steps. Sleep itself, then, would have taken place beneath a sky that was both deeply familiar and full of significance. To rest under such a sky is to be sheltered within a larger schedule of becoming. It is easy to romanticize this world, and perhaps that is inevitable in a bedtime telling. Yet the ancient Egyptian past was never static or simple. It lasted so long that it changed many times while still remaining recognizably itself. Dynasties rose and fell, capitals moved, foreign rulers came and were absorbed or resisted, religious centers gained prominence and then declined, artistic conventions persisted over centuries and then subtly shifted, languages evolved, scripts transformed. The civilization was ancient enough to contain its own deep past. That depth is one reason the myths feel so spacious. They were not frozen in a single doctrinal moment. They were revised, interpreted, joined to new political realities, and recited in new temples by new generations. A hymn written in one era might preserve older ideas in a slightly different arrangement. A funerary text might echo a much older liturgy. A relief carved in stone might preserve a god's posture long after the living belief had altered in emphasis. The material record thus becomes a layered dream, each stratum preserving an older form of thought beneath a later one. In the tombs, this layering is especially moving. The dead were not simply buried. They were equipped, protected, supplied with spells, foods, images, names, and pathways. Tomb walls became maps and memories. Coffins became texts. Sarcophagi became cosmic containers. To prepare the dead for the afterlife was to trust that continuity mattered even beyond bodily life. That trust, whether one reads it religiously or symbolically, is deeply human. It says that the individual is worth preserving within a larger order, and that the passage through death does not erase identity all at once. The Book of the Dead, in its many manuscript forms, is one of the most evocative survivals from this world. It is not a single book in the modern sense, but a body of spells and guidance. The very notion of speaking correctly in the presence of the unseen is ancient and tender. A person may need words to become secure. A name may function like a key. Knowledge is not abstract, it is salvational. The dead are helped by remembered language, and the living too are reassured by the idea that some paths can be spoken into clarity. There are moments in Egyptian funerary art when the boundary between death and rebirth almost dissolves into a quiet ceremony of transformation. The deceased stands or lies in ordered space, surrounded by symbols of renewal, protection, and divine continuity. Flowers, lotuses, birds, and luminous eyes appear as signs of return. The lotus itself, which closes and opens with the day, became a natural emblem for rising again. It is one of those exquisite botanical facts that feels almost mythic on its own. A flower that submerges and re-emerges can easily become a mirror of the sun, the soul, and the hoped-for future. In that same spirit, the scarab beetle became a sacred image of self-renewing motion. Khepri, the morning form of the sun, was associated with this small creature that seems to roll light-bearing spheres across the ground. The ancient observer saw not only an insect but a moving sign of cosmic labor. The sun, like the beetle, appears to bring itself into visibility each day. This is not a naive explanation. It is a poetic recognition that the world is full of analogies. Small things illuminate large things, and large things return meaning to the small. There is also a certain quiet courage in Egyptian depictions of creation. The world begins in waters, yes, but from those waters rises a place where naming becomes possible. To name is to claim relation. One cannot say river, sky, field, king, star, seed, or bread until the world has taken on distinctions. Creation is thus the birth of language as much as it is the birth of matter. A silent universe is one kind of vastness. A universe where names can be spoken is another. Egypt's myths belong to the latter, and they understand that speech itself is part of order. This makes the gods less like distant abstractions and more like aspects of a living grammar. Atum, Ra, Khepri, Ptah, Ammon, Osiris, Isis, Horus, Thoth, and the many local divine forms are not merely characters in a story. They are ways of describing functions of existence. Atum as completeness becoming differentiated, Ra as visible power and daily renewal, Ptah as thoughtful or spoken creation, Ammon as hiddenness, Osiris as fertility, kingship, and the dead transformed, Isis as devotion, healing, and the gathering of fragments, Horus as rightful succession and embodied kingship, Thoth as writing, measure, and articulate intelligence. Together they form a sacred vocabulary of the world's operations. The later tendency to combine gods, identifying one with another in certain contexts, may seem confusing at first, but it also reveals a profound flexibility. A god could be local and universal at once. A temple could honor a specific sacred history while participating in a wider theology. One could speak of Amun-Ra or of Re-Horakti not because distinctions had vanished, but because divine reality was understood as capable of exceeding neat boundaries. A name could be both particular and expansive. In that sense, Egyptian religion behaves a little like a landscape seen in moonlight. Contours remain visible, but some edges soften into one another. The monuments left by that world continue to invite this kind of patient attention. The great temple complexes at Karnak and Luxor, the rock-cut sanctuaries at Abu Simbel, the painted chambers in the Valley of the Kings, the ruined cities and lesser shrines across the country, all preserve traces of a civilization that thought deeply about time. Stone can seem immovable, but in Egypt it often functioned as a medium of memory against erosion. The inscriptions do not stop the centuries. They simply insist that the centuries be recorded. Even broken walls still whisper with the discipline of old hands. And there are quieter sites as well, smaller than the famous grand monuments that suggest how widespread and woven sacred life was. Village tombs, household figurines, tiny amulets, rings, shaptis, and charms remind us that myth reached into daily practice. People carried protection on their bodies. They placed it under their pillows, around necks, in burial wrappings, and in niches. The sacred was not only for kings and priests. It could rest in a child's hand or hang at the throat of a laborer. The imagination of order belonged to ordinary life too. Some of the most haunting Egyptian objects are not enormous at all but intimate. A painted coffin lid, a papyrus fragment, a pair of sandals, a comb, a bread mold, a toy beside a burial. Such objects make the ancient dead feel briefly near, not as abstractions but as individuals who lived amid textures, routines, and small comforts. This closeness gives a different shape to the grand myths. The first dawn is not only a cosmic event, it is also the promise that one more day will unfold for someone who has not yet finished kneading bread, mending linen, or walking to the riverbank at dawn. That everyday dimension may be why Egyptian creation stories continue to resonate so powerfully. They do not isolate the cosmic from the domestic. The sun's journey, the king's role, the river's inundation, the preservation of the dead, and the maintenance of household order all belong to one broad field of meaning. A world that begins in light must still be washed, measured, fed, and remembered. Creation is large enough to include a bowl of grain and a star above a temple pylon. If one lingers in these myths long enough, a subtle mood begins to emerge. It is not triumphal. It is not anxious. It is reverent and steady. The Egyptian cosmos does not need to be forever remade. It needs to be renewed. That distinction matters. Something renewed remains itself while becoming fresh again. A day renewed is not a different day in absolute terms. It is the same world restored to visibility. This is perhaps why the sunrise held such significance. Every dawn was a miniature theophany, a gentle proof that the hidden could return without losing continuity. Even the language of emergence, so central to the myths, carries this mood. To emerge is not to explode outward, it is to appear from concealment. It is to become visible at the edge of waiting. A lotus emerges from water, the sun emerges from night, the land emerges from flood, the dead emerge into judgment, the king emerges in procession, the temple image emerges from the inner sanctuary. The verb itself feels patient, almost shy. Egypt knew that what matters most often comes forth gradually, and perhaps because of this, the civilization developed such profound attentiveness to thresholds. Doors, gates, pylons, passageways, shrines, causeways, ramps, and tomb corridors are not merely practical forms. They are architectural acknowledgements that crossing is meaningful. One does not simply move from place to place. One passes, one enters, one exits, one is received. Even the geography of Egypt, with its fertile strip bordered by wilderness, its riverbanks and desert edges, its east and west distinctions, reinforces a culture of thresholds. The east is for the living sun, the west for burial and setting, yet both belong to the same ordered whole. There is a deep tenderness in the notion that the west, where the sun sets, became a favored place for tombs. What better resting place for the dead than the side of the world, where light goes down to begin its hidden journey? The desert west of the Nile became a realm of necropolis and transformation. There, among cliffs and silence, the dead could be placed under the guardianship of the setting sun and the promise of dawn. The geography itself seemed to participate in theology. At the same time, the Egyptian religious imagination never fully abandons the practical world. Offerings mattered, grain mattered, water mattered, incense mattered, cleanliness mattered. Images mattered because they were fed, purified, and activated by ritual. The relationship between divine and human was not remote, it was reciprocal. People sustained the gods through rites, and the gods sustained the people through order, fertility, and protection. In the hush of temple chambers, this reciprocity must have felt like the very breathing of civilization. The priests who tended these spaces inherited long traditions of movement, recitation, and sacred administration. Their roles were learned, repeated, and disciplined. The temple was not a place of spontaneous display so much as ordered rhythm. There is a calm beauty in that. A place where words are repeated across centuries acquires an almost weathered serenity. One can imagine the scent of incense clinging to stone, the dimness inside the sanctuary, the polished surfaces catching filtered light, the slow steps of attendants, the cadence of hymn and offering. Such scenes ask nothing hurried of the mind. And yet behind the stillness, history continued. Egypt was not isolated from change. Trade brought new materials. Diplomacy brought new ideas. Conquest brought foreign dynasties, some fleeting, some enduring. Hyksos, Nubians, Assyrians, Persians, Greeks, Romans, each left traces in a land that had already been old for a very long time. The myths absorbed these pressures in different ways. Some gods rose in prominence, others blended with imported forms. Temples were expanded, neglected, restored, or repurposed. The old order proved resilient but not untouched. It survived by changing enough to remain itself. There is something moving about a civilization that can be ancient and adaptable at once. It suggests that continuity is not the opposite of change. Continuity may depend on careful change. A river remains a river not because every drop is fixed, but because the channel persists. Egypt's channel was made of memory, ritual, landscape, and language. The water within it shifted for thousands of years. The surviving texts, too, have their own quiet romance. Many come to us incomplete. Names are missing, lines are broken, papyri are damaged, walls are eroded, tombs have been plundered, yet the fragments still speak. In a strange way, their incompleteness suits the subject. Creation myths are about what becomes visible from what was not yet differentiated. So too, scholarship often begins with fragments emerging from dust, and meaning is reconstructed patiently. The past reveals itself as both present and absent, which is perhaps fitting for a culture so attentive to hiddenness and return. One might think of the library-like atmosphere of modern study as an echo of Thoth's domain, where writing is not merely record but a form of ordered thought. The Egyptian scripts themselves, especially hieroglyphs, carry a visual poise that makes even administrative texts seem partially ceremonial. A sign can be picture, sound, and symbol at once. Writing is not stripped of image. It remains near the world it names. A bird, a reed, an eye, a foot, a loaf of bread, a seated man, these are not arbitrary marks. They retain a small likeness to life, as if language itself remembered where it came from. That visual eloquence helps explain why Egyptian art has such lasting magnetism. The figures appear profile and front, motion and stillness, abstraction and realism. They do not aim at fleeting optical effect. They aim at permanence of form. In a culture that revered preservation, art became a way of holding appearance in a timeless pose. A banquet scene, a hunt, a procession, a divine embrace, a field of grain, a boat on water, all are rendered with an eye toward continuity rather than instant impression. To look at these images is to step into a slow visual tempo. Perhaps this is also why the myths feel suitable for bedtime. They do not hurry the imagination. They let one dwell in beginnings without forcing conclusion. The first mound remains under the sky. The waters remain deep but not threatening. The sun remains on its appointed course. The gods continue their work. The dead are guided. The living are sheltered. The stars keep time. The river remembers. The desert listens. And if one were to drift farther into this ancient reverie, one might imagine the earliest temples not as finished structures but as repeated acts of orientation. A shrine placed toward the rising sun, a sacred precinct marked by boundary walls, a procession route from river to sanctuary. A chapel where offerings were set down each morning. In such spaces, the world is continually recentered. Every ritual is a modest reenactment of first dawn, not because the beginning was lost, but because it must be held in the present. The world does not stay ordered by accident. It is remembered into place. This is perhaps the deepest quiet of Egyptian creation thought. The cosmos is both given and maintained. The gods do not vanish after making it. The world does not sustain itself without attention. Order is a living achievement. In the background of every day there is a mythic labor, a sacred labor, a labor of return. The sun returns, the flood returns, the offering returns, the name returns. The dead are not forgotten. The hidden things are not forever hidden. So as the mind softens and the body grows more still, it may be enough to imagine a small bright edge appearing again over the dark horizon. Not a sudden blaze, but a gradual warming. The waters parting around a mound, a feather held in balance, a boat moving without strain, a temple doorway receiving the first light. A line of birds crossing the pale sky, a riverbank waking one reed at a time, a quiet god turning toward morning, a civilization listening for order in the world and finding it again and again in the patient return of dawn. And after all the old stories, after all the names and cities and sacred forms, there is still this simple gift. The beginning was not a one-time event locked far away. It is a pattern that remains available. It can be remembered in stone, in water, in star and song, in the slow opening of the sky. It can be approached gently without grasping. It can be trusted. Let the Nile keep its ancient rhythm. Let the stars keep their measured watch. Let the mound remain steady in the waters of the beginning. Let the sun, in all its forms, travel onward and return. Let Mat settle the world into balance. Let the names of the gods drift softly and then rest. Let the west receive what must be laid down, and the east receive what must rise. Let the temple lamps dim. Let the desert hold its silence. Let the first dawn and every dawn after it remain near enough to comfort the dark. And now, as the quiet deepens and even thought begins to loosen at its edges, may the old Egyptian world continue in peace beyond the threshold of sleep, luminous and ordered, half seen and gently lasting, like light on water just before morning.